Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, is this a legacy season for the Philadelphia Phillies? Well, a prominent MLB insider I spoke to says it absolutely is. We'll discuss who and why they thought that on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're checking us out on YouTube, hit that subscribe button to the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel. That'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted so you don't miss any big news as we draw closer to the season. It's also a great way to help us out here on Locked On Phillies. A great way to say thank you for the content is hitting that subscribe button. So free, easy, helps both of us out. It's an awesome thing to do. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed and everyone who's going to subscribe. So we have a great episode for you today. And part of the breakdown of this episode, where some of this stuff comes from, is I had a conversation last night on 97.5 The Fanatic with MLB Hall of Fame writer Jayson Stark. He knows the ins and outs of baseball as well as pretty much any person on this planet. And it was really cool to get a chance to talk to him. I'll have future conversations with him as we lead up to the season that I'll be able to relay back to you here on the podcast. And he had some very interesting things to say. So one of the first things we're going to get into is a point that he had about this being a legacy season for the Philadelphia Phillies. I'll explain kind of what he meant by that, or what he explained his point as, and my thoughts on it. Also, we have an interesting note on some camp cutdowns, and part of this comes from that conversation as well with Jayson Stark. And finally, we have your off-the-poll responses to our question on Twitter about your faith level in where the bullpen is going to be this year for the Philadelphia Phillies. And Jayson Stark shared a bunch of stuff. One thing, because we did talk about this a little bit yesterday on the what does spring training mean, or how important is it? It was either yesterday or 2 days ago where we talked about the Sean Murphy injury for the Braves. And the most important thing with spring training, like, you don't make these big generalizations about who's good, who's bad, or anything like that, especially not star major league players. These guys are just getting through spring training. You remember the Max Scherzer thing we talked about where he faced Trey Turner? Max Scherzer had complained about the ABS system before, so Trey Turner immediately challenged the first pitch of the game. Well, Jayson Stark was part of the reason that happened, because he was in conversations with both of those guys just in the clubhouse talking about it. And Trey Turner actually came up with the idea after the conversation with Jayson Stark. But funny enough, Stark talked to Max Scherzer after the game and asked him about it. That first pitch was like a middle fastball that Trey Turner challenged, which is why it was so funny. But also the reasoning behind that, Max Scherzer said he was trying to groove a fastball to his former teammate to give him something to hit. Like, Max Scherzer, this crazy competitor in spring training, is trying to groove a fastball to Trey Turner because they were buddies on a team. Like, it sounds crazy, but that's the reported story. And you'd be surprised how often these weird stories pop up in spring training of guys taking things lightly. Spring training is country club. Even the most competitive players, like a guy like Max Scherzer, who's certifiably insane on the mound, is grooving fastballs to opposing players because he played with them in the past, and it's spring training. Nobody cares. Like, that's just a little idea of where the level of competition at spring training is at for these major league guys. There's going to be some guys we talk about in our second segment that are trying to make the team, that are playing their rears off. And it's not every guy is just like taking stuff not seriously. And even those pro guys, they're getting ready. But just the actual games, that's why you don't look into it too much. But we were talking to Jayson Stark because he has a great article coming out on The Athletic. It may be out by the time you watch this episode, so if you have an Athletic subscription, go ahead and look for Jayson's work. But it's like arrow heading up, arrow heading down was kind of the idea behind it. And where are the Phillies right now? Are they heading up? Are they heading down? There are competing schools of thought. And one of the things he said in his explanation to that was that this is a legacy season for the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, what exactly does this mean? And do we agree with Jayson Stark? Well, what it essentially means is kind of the topic that I've touched a couple times on this show, but we haven't really focused in too much on it. This is kind of the defining year for this Philadelphia Phillies core, right? For Bryce Harper, for Trey Turner, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, all of these guys that you currently know as the main guys on the Philadelphia Phillies. It's not the final year of their window. It's not their last chance at this. But this group is this Phillies era, right? Kyle Schwarber is a part of this Phillies era. Nick Castellanos, a huge part of this Phillies era. JT Realmuto, a gigantic part of this Phillies era. And these are guys that you could see walk out of the building. And another part of it, too, is not just the guys you'll lose, but the perspective that you will lose in the fan base if you come up short again, right? It's tough to put any team in March and say, you've got to go win the World Series or the fan base is going to be upset with you. Those are crazy expectations. And for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025, they're once again valid, just like they were in 2024 and 2023. Once you make it in 22 and you improve the team and you sign big-time players and you seem to be better on paper, that is always going to be the benchmark that this team is judged by. But with that, they've been sliding, right? We know the backslide that they've had in the postseason, World Series to NLCS to NLDS exit. And now we sit here as we are just a couple weeks away from the 2025 regular season. And we say, well, are they going to keep doing what we saw in the late 2000s or early 2010s, where this Phillies team just took those incremental steps backwards until we had the 10-year playoff drought? We all hope that's not the case, but that's the direction it's heading right now. If the Phillies go out and let's say they even make it to the NLCS again, and they're facing the Dodgers and they come up short. Now, that'll probably be a valiant effort because that LA team is stacked. But where will the fan base be? They're still at a place, even though there's a lot of noise from the fan base about what this team can't do. Jayson Stark made it very clear. He believes this is an incredibly talented baseball team. One of the things he said was, I don't understand why so many people are sleeping on the Philadelphia Phillies as a true World Series contender. They're absolutely a true World Series contender. And I believe everything that Jayson Stark tells me. He is a Hall of Fame baseball writer that's been around this game longer than I've been alive. So he knows what he's talking about. He talks to people. He gets the feeling of people around the league. Like, I take his word as basically gospel. And that's not just because I get the chance to talk to him. It's because of his resume and everything like that. But the point of that is, like, this is a talented baseball team. The expectation should be World Series. But if you come up short 4 times in a row, right? 22 was kind of like this magical run that we don't really fault them for because the Astros are the Astros, or they were at that time. And the Phillies were this young, plucky, upstart underdog team that got there and gave us great memories and everything. And that played in that series solidly, not well enough to win it, obviously, but we don't kill them for that. The next 2 years, they get absolutely crushed for the way they went out of the postseason, and rightfully so. And there's going to be a portion of this fan base that has already turned on the Philadelphia Phillies because they're going to be seen as guys that can't get the job done. That narrative is going to reach a fever pitch if this season does not result in a World Series. And how does that change the view on the Philadelphia Phillies nationally, locally, in their own clubhouse? Do the doubts seep in even more to the point where it may be irreparable? And I'm not saying irreparable like trade everybody, burn it down. I'm saying it will be very, very, very difficult to overcome they can't get it done in the postseason type of conversation if they go out this year and have another disappointing out. And maybe it's not fair to say like it's World Series or bust for this team just because of how good the Los Angeles Dodgers seem to be. But to be the best, you got to beat the best. And that's what the Phillies have out in front of them. So the legacy season conversation for the Philadelphia Phillies is that if you think there's going to be a significant shift in the way this team is viewed if they don't win it this year, and there's going to be some significant roster turnover next offseason because of where contracts are, then absolutely you have to call this a legacy season. I agree entirely with Jayson Stark that at the end of the day, we will remember this era as a whole, right? We will remember the Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto Phillies, and I think we'll remember them fondly more than annoyed, right? Because of the moments they gave us and what they ended, which was a 10-year drought where Phillies baseball wasn't relevant. We have gotten back to Red October, right? Remember what it was like without Red October? We're so used to it now. It's such a certainty. But bringing that back to us is no small feat and one that they should be celebrated for in this city. But ultimately, their legacies, when they signed here, they were supposed to be World Series champions. Bryce Harper was supposed to bring a world championship back to Philly, as he meant to say in his introductory press conference down in spring training when he was first signed by the team. Trey Turner came here to be a World Series champion again. After winning one in Washington, he was coming here to get a chance to summit the mountaintop again. And guess what? If they don't get that done, their legacy is going to be tarnished as Philadelphia Phillies, right? It's not individually. It's not these guys stunk, but it will be they couldn't get over the hump. So ultimately, when we look back on the story of the Philadelphia Phillies in this era, this season is going to be pivotal for how we view it. Is it going to be the, man, they finally got it done. Thank goodness. Wow, what a team. They had a great run. They were constantly competing, and then they finally climbed over the hill. It might have taken them too long, but we're happy with it. Or is it going to be the, yeah, we had moments, but no ring, right? Is it going to be the Donovan McNabb Eagles? I would hate to go through that again. So legacy season for the Phillies, I think that's absolutely a fair way to put it. And that just shows you what's on the line this year when they try and compete in the regular season, the postseason, if and when they get there. And I believe they're going to get there. They're a playoff team. And then what they do in the postseason. It's going to be a very, very interesting setup for how this Phillies team or this group of Phillies players, since they've kept a lot of the same players year over year, are going to be viewed by future generations when we look back on this time in Phillies baseball. So some great insight by Jayson Stark there. And I have some more for you coming up next because there was an interesting note that he brought up on some camp cutdowns. I haven't really talked to you guys about this yet either, but I want to break down what happened with the camp cutdowns, a couple big names out of camp, and an interesting one staying. We'll talk about who that is coming up next as we continue today's episode. All right, so we mentioned last episode that minor league camp has opened up. And when minor league camp opens up, this is when you start to see major league teams send guys that are not going to make the roster, that had their opportunities in major league camp, and now you say, okay, we're going to start zoning in on who our guys are going to be for the start of the season. We're going to start ramping up towards more competitive baseball. Go play in the minor league camp. You're right there, so we can keep an eye on you, but get your work in away from the major league team because it's just too much to keep an eye on when you have that many guys around and you're focusing on preparing for a season. You want as much time with the 26 dudes you're bringing to Washington for opening day. And that is what the Philadelphia Phillies did earlier this week. So a couple of the first guys out of spring training for the Philadelphia Phillies were Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford. And I have brought this up to you guys before. They're not going to make the team, right? They were never going to make the team. This was a get your feet wet. Here's what it looks like to be in Major League camp. Meet some of the big league players. There was a great article in The Athletic by Matt Gelb about Brandon Marsh talking about Justin Crawford and his thoughts on the kid and saying how much he likes the way he goes about stuff. We've heard everyone lauding Aiden Miller throughout his career with the Philadelphia Phillies in the minor leagues, who he is as a prospect, who he is as a worker, what he could be as an infielder for this team and a hitter for this team in the future when he comes up. He's one of their best prospects, obviously, one of the better prospects in baseball right now. But there was no place for them on this team. It would have been too hasty to go ahead and bring them up. Now, Jayson Stark did say, with what's going on in the outfield for the Phillies and some uncertainty in the depth, would he be surprised if Justin Crawford was up at some point this year? He said he wouldn't be. I'm not so sure, but that's a very interesting insight from someone who spent time down at spring training this year and knows this team inside and out. So could we see a Justin Crawford debut in 2025? Jayson Stark says don't rule it out. I don't think it's likely, but it's a possibility, which is interesting to look at. What's even more interesting is one of the guys that's still in Major League camp, and that's Gabriel Rincones. So Rincones is a guy that has been tearing the cover off the ball down there in Clearwater and the other towns in Florida in which they played their away games. He's had unbelievable exit velocity. They're apparently starting to call him Uncle Rico because partially his last name. And because they say he can hit a baseball over those mountains out there. Not that there's mountains in Florida, but it's a line from Napoleon Dynamite that I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, where the character Uncle Rico said he could throw a football over those mountains back in the day. He's got power where the guys on the major league team are starting to notice. Now, I don't think he makes the team, right? I don't think he's going to be a guy that gets an opening day roster spot, but he is kind of one of those odd men out where he's one of the higher ranked prospects in the Phillies system, but all of the focus is on three guys. Pitching, it's on Andrew Painter. Outfield, it's on Justin Crawford. Infield, it's on Aiden Miller. And everyone else has kind of gone by the wayside because really a fan base, in my opinion, only has the capacity for a handful of top prospects, maybe like 2 or 3 top guys to focus on at any given time because one, you're not watching a lot of you're not watching a lot of minor league baseball. And 2, only so many guys can come up and fill positions. You're not having guys call up all 5 of their like top prospects in a week. So it's a system of like, this guy's closest, he's the next guy to focus on. And then we have our 1 or 2 darlings that are highly projectable assets that may be further down in the system. Those are guys like Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford. Andrew Painter is right on the verge. He will be up at some point this year. But Rincones is different. He's a little bit closer to major league ready, it seems. And that's why it's interesting that he's being kept in major league camp after you send 2 of your top prospects down to minor league camp. That means the Phillies are seeing something that has them interested in Rincones for the upcoming season. Now, I don't know if this is hey, let's see what the kid's got a little more. He's intriguing to find out what he could be at like maybe AAA, or if it's a legitimate, hey, we might need outfield depth this year. Is this guy our first call up when we get into a situation where we do? Because we know injuries happen all the time. The 3 Philadelphia Phillies outfielders that are starting, in my opinion, are going to be Kepler, Marsh, and Castellanos. You're not going to see those guys all play 162. Castellanos did last year, and we almost threw a parade for him. That's how rare it is for guys to play every single game out there. Guys will have injuries. Guys will miss time due to whatever, and you'll have to have more depth. And the Phillies outfield depth at the major league level is questionable at best. We've discussed that on this show, how they don't have a lot of guys out there that you look at and say, okay, you're a bona fide depth piece that is serviceable if we need to play you for 3 weeks. Rojas could be if he hits. And we've seen him play significantly at the major league level. But outside of him, I don't know, man. Who's going to play outfield? You're going to move Edmundo Sosa out there? That doesn't seem like the world's smartest choice. Cody Clemens is the guy that I picked to have the other spot on the roster because Weston Wilson is not going to be available for the start of the season. So he's out for the time being. Cody Clemens ain't going out there and playing center or anything like that. Maybe you could put him in the corner outfield spot in a pinch, but I don't see that as likely. Cal Stevenson's okay. Buddy Kennedy's okay. I don't know where the depth comes from. So if you have a guy tearing the cover off the ball in spring training, that might be a name to get to know. That might be a name that you say, hey, maybe we take a flyer on this kid. The other thing that the Phillies have the benefit of, right? This is the upside that we don't talk about of them being a great regular season team. They can be a little riskier in the regular season because they know that if they put a bad 7, 8, 9 hitter out there, well, you still have Harper, Schwarber, Turner, Romuto, Castellanos, all of these guys at the top, Bohm, Stott, near the top of the order that should be able to carry the weight of the lineup. So if you want to try a Rincones at some point because injuries happen, you say, well, let's see if this kid is a piece for the future. Let's give him a couple opportunities. Much like they did with Weston Wilson when he first came up, and then he promptly rewarded them with a home run in his first major league at bat, much like they did with Buddy Kennedy last year. Now, Kennedy had been with major league teams before, but gets an opportunity to prove his worth to this team. He had a swing or two that looked solid at the major league level last year. We'll see if he gets a deeper opportunity this year. Like, you need to know what your future is, especially when we're talking about this as a legacy season for the Philadelphia Phillies. And part of that reason is there will be guys that will be moving on this offseason. Ranger Suarez is another one that will be on the move, I believe, at the end of this season. I don't think he's traded in season, but I do think this is his last year as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. We'll talk a little bit more about that in an episode we have later on in spring training, where I want to dive into the Ranger Suarez kind of projection of where he's going to be. But that's something that piqued Jayson Stark's interest. It piqued my interest. It piqued Ricky Vitalico's interest, who was co-hosting the show with me. Of course, you know Ricky from his time playing for the Phillies. So you got me, some guy with a podcast. You got Jayson Stark, a Hall of Fame baseball writer, and you got Ricky Vitalico, who is a former Major League Baseball All-Star. Now, I like to think that I can hold my own in that conversation, but the point is, this ain't your boys at the bar. Like, the conversation pushing towards Rincones was because Jayson Stark is seeing and hearing things down there in camp about the opportunity that he's earned for himself to stay in camp a little bit longer. I don't know if it materializes into a call-up at any point this year, but if you want something to watch in spring training, a guy that we talked about, guys not taking stuff seriously in spring training, the major league caliber guys, the star players, I don't blame them. I mean, as long as they're ready to go come March 27th, I don't care what you do in Clearwater. But if you want to see a dude play hard for a spot, Rincones is doing that. He's giving you some fun stuff to watch down there in Clearwater if you're going to a game or if you're just watching on TV. By the way, when I come back next week, because this episode will go out on Thursday, the 6th, and then I'm going to go to Florida. Well, I fly out today on Wednesday for Florida. I'll be back on Monday, and I'll have some reports back in spring training because I'm going to see a game. I'm going to be zoned in on who's doing what down there. Going to get a chance to talk to some people. So I'll be able to report back with more stuff from Clearwater. So maybe you're planning your vacation as well. Go down there, watch Rincones, see him swing the bat. Guy's a tank. I think Kyle Schwarber's comment when he saw him first swing was, "Who's this big donkey?" And he didn't mean that derogatorily. He meant that like, yo, guy's a hoss. It's the heck out of the baseball. Let's see what goes on with his swing when he gets in the game. And he's been creating exit velocity. So it's weird to talk about in a championship contending season, the Gabriel Rincones spring training nugget, but these are the things that set you up for the future, or these are the things that help you survive pitfalls in the regular season when they come across for a team like the Philadelphia Phillies. While they do have big-time expectations, right? And you hope nothing goes too wrong with this team so that they can be competitive and get good seeding in the postseason, qualify for the postseason, set themselves up for a deep playoff run, we hope. Well, the reality is guys get hurt all the time. Things go wrong all the time. You could still be successful. You want to be prepared for that. Speaking of being prepared, how prepared is the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen? Well, we're not quite sure. There's some question marks, and I've outlined those multiple times, but I wanted to see how the fan base feels about the bullpen. So I put a poll question out there for our Off the Poll segment, and I'll just say the fan base is not as high on the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen as I am. And maybe they're right. We'll discuss that coming up as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let's talk about wonderful pistachios first. Maybe you're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious. I don't know why you wouldn't be, but if you are, crack into a good source of protein with wonderful pistachios. Wonderful pistachios, one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help keep you feeling fuller longer. So I got this bag here of my finished sea salt and vinegar no shells version because I don't like to crack the shells. They give you the no shells version, or you can get the old fashioned ones. My mom likes to crack the shells open. She likes those ones. To each their own. They've got a whole bunch of options. I'm going on a flight. You know what I'm going to do? I got to run a couple errands real quick before I catch the plane. I'm going to grab some wonderful pistachios for the plane because I got to make sure that I got a snack that I love, and I love these. They're amazing. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Also, that protein helps you get in shape for summer. Weather's getting warmer. It's right around the corner, folks. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's talk about our off the poll question. So yesterday we talked about the bullpen trust meter and where I'm at with what this bullpen unit could be. We ran through the individual pitchers. We went through their roles. We went through projections, and there are still a bunch of unknowns. If this guy's healthy, if this guy progresses, if this guy does what he did last year, a lot of ifs. Last year, you had a couple guys coming back that you felt pretty secure in, and Matt Strahm and Jeff Hoffman, and Jose Alvarado was coming off a great year. Now, well, you bring in Jordan Romano, you bring in Joe Ross, you lose Jeff Hoffman, you lose Carlos Estevez, who you acquired at the deadline. You don't know who your final spot in the bullpen is even going to go to. Could it be Taijuan Walker? I would have a conniption, but I don't know at this point, and not knowing makes people nervous. I think this Philadelphia Phillies bullpen right now is a top 8 unit in baseball. I do. Right? That's kind of where I put their floor for their potential. And then where's their upside? 3, 4, maybe even higher than that, into the 1-2 type of territory. It could be, right? Now that's a heck of a jump from 8. There's a bunch of teams that have to leapfrog when injuries happen and stuff like that. Guys progress, and there are some guys with upside like Jordan Romano or Ryan Kirkring, Jose Alvarado, Matt Strahm. They have plenty of dudes, Jose Ruiz, that could have upside and could also have downside. So it's not the most clear-cut group one way or another. So I asked the question, What's your opinion on the Phil's bullpen? Was the question on the poll, and there were 4 options. The first option was elite, top 2 or 3 in Major League Baseball. Option 2 was great, top 8 or 10 in Major League Baseball. The next one was average, 18 to 11 in Major League Baseball. So right in that middle zone. And the final option was below average, 30 to 19. So in the bottom 11 teams in the major leagues when it comes to a bullpen unit. Now, I'm happy to report that only 3% of responders and the lowest amount of responses was on the below average 30 to 19. Could have just been a couple people trolling. I don't think anyone looks at this bullpen and says they're a below average bullpen. That's an insane take to have. It is an incorrect take to have. If it plays out that way, it will be because of injuries, and injuries alone. They're too talented to be in that zone. So, no. Now, the second highest responder, with only 2% more of the vote, 5% of people responding to this said elite, top 2 to 3 in Major League Baseball. I don't think that's crazy to say that only 5% of people believe that, because I'm not personally there yet. They could get there. You just heard me talking about how they could project out to be that at some point this season, but you can't go into this season with 2 new acquisitions that are going to be in big time roles. A couple of guys coming back that are not really like career major leaguers at this point yet. Like, I can't call Ryan Kerkering, even though I think he's going to be awesome this year, a career major leaguer, right? Like, he's had a year and a couple games at the major league level. There's still, the jury's out on him. Same with Jose Ruiz. Like, there are question marks all over the place when it comes to this bullpen. And a lot of them, I believe, are going to have good answers. But the top 2 to 3 bullpen in baseball, you're looking at a group that has been together, has a lot of veterans. You know what they're going to be. It's like, oh, these guys are dirty. Like, they're going to get a lot of people out. They're going to make up for a bad rotation if you have one. That's not where I have the Phillies at right now. The third highest, so coming in second place, I should say, with 36% of the vote. Huge jump. Remember, 3% said below average, 5% said elite. 36% of responders say great, top 8 to 10 in Major League Baseball. That is exactly where I'm at. That's exactly what I was saying. I think that's the zone that they're in. I don't think that's a bad place to be at all. If you're in the top third of baseball with your bullpen and you have an elite level rotation and you have stars up and down your lineup and you won 95 games last year, you should feel pretty darn good about your baseball team's ability to compete. This bullpen doesn't have to be elite, at least not right now. Now, in the postseason, after last year, what they did or didn't do against the New York Mets, you would probably want them to be elite. But we got a long way between now and October. For the time being, going in saying that top 10 bullpen in baseball, we will take that to start. Also, remember, trade deadline acquisitions. Every contending team adds a relief pitcher every single year. So you're going to see somebody come onto this staff. Maybe Carlos Estevez guy, maybe better, maybe worse. But there will be changes to the bullpen over the year. That's why I've got them in the great top 8 to 10 in Major League Baseball zone. But the winner of the poll with 56% of the responses was average, 18 to 11 in Major League Baseball. I think this is underselling the Philadelphia Phillies. I think they have, when you look at individual pitchers, I think they have 3 guys that are above average with very, very little argument on this. Ryan Kerkering is an above average Major League reliever. Yes, already. Matt Strahm, who was an all-star member of the National League squad last year, is an above-average Major League reliever. And I'm going to give you another one here. Jose Alvarado is an above-average Major League reliever. He is. I firmly feel that way. His stuff is nasty. He had a tough middle part of the season last year. And when he gets wild, it looks bad visually because he throws so violently and he misses the plate so poorly. But he's a guy that has major upside. And even at his floor is still throwing 99 with cut in on lefties' hands. Like, he's impossible to hit. I don't know anybody ever does. The only person who can get guys on base on Jose Alvarado seems to be Jose Alvarado. So you got 3 guys who are above average. Jordan Romano has been an all-star before. And he's a guy that is probably going to start as the closer of this team. And if he's healthy, he is easily an above average Major League reliever. I just can't put him there right now because of health. So you got 4 of the 8 guys being above average dudes. And then Jose Ruiz has upside. Tanner Banks is a good specialist matchup. Joe Ross had a sub-2 ERA in his time in the bullpen in Milwaukee last year. We'll see if that carries over. He could have above average upside. Like, you look at so many of these names and you say, okay, do I have a question about them? Yes. Is the more likely thing they're better than they are bad? Also, yes. This is an above average bullpen. I don't have them elite yet, so I disagree a little bit with the responders, but I'm glad that no one's saying, like, one, they're the best in baseball, because they're not, and two, they're the worst in baseball, because they're not. I think they're in that top third of the league, and we will see how that plays out once the season rolls around. That's all for today's episode. I got to head to vacation. Our next episode will come out on Monday when I get back from Florida, and we'll have a little bit of a recap of what I saw down in spring training, as well as some other news that I'm sure will drop throughout the rest of the week and the weekend. But thank you so much for checking us out again on Locked On Phillies. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that really helps us out. And I will talk to you on Monday on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.